What do we know about the true culture of the Russians? Many will be surprised and say, how is that? What about the kokoshnik, the kosovorotka, the balalaika, and the samovar? But what if we look at the situation with a clear mind? Who knows at least one truly Russian folk song? Anyone? Only Rustling Reeds and Moscow Nights don't count. Almost every song we've grown up considering folk has an author, and almost all were written in the second half of the 19th century and later. 3 generations of Russians have changed one after another, and it's very hard for us to believe that the caricatured image of a Russian, existing in the mass consciousness, has as little to do with the truth as the films about Russians made in Hollywood. So who has seen at least one authentic folk costume created in the 13th century? No one. Russian cultural scholars, and later Soviet ones, who were engaged in creating the so-called Russian national culture, turned out to be not only non-Russians, but not even Slavs. Now it's clear where the image of Ivan the Fool, who is magically lucky all his life, came from. It's obvious thanks to whom the stable image of a Russian woman in kokoshniks with red apples on her cheeks and charcoal-drawn eyebrows was formed. Thanks to those who were creating nations. The British got the image of a stern and courageous gentleman, the French got the image of a fair-haired knight, the Scandinavians a fierce Viking with horns on his iron helmet, and the Slavs got what was left. This looks like a completely planned effort aimed at dividing people based on national characteristics. Exactly, dividing, not uniting, as it might seem at first. If representatives of different nations saw that their neighbors spoke the same language as them, sang the same songs, dressed the same, then they would instinctively perceive their neighbors as their own. If they are all the same, how can you wage war against your brothers? It's a completely different story when, at first glance, you can see that the person is a stranger. Well, if they are a stranger, then waging war against them is not a sin. Especially if there are rumors that the neighbors have a different faith and that they sacrifice infants to their gods. Then they're not people at all. Kill all those infidels. Therefore, the creation of nations in the 19th century was only part of a plan that continues to be implemented to this day. It's hard to believe because it seems impossible to carry out a long-term plan over several generations. But the fact is there. If you know something about secret societies, whose doctrines were formed in the late Middle Ages or even earlier, then everything falls into place. Members of such organizations scrupulously carry out everything that was planned by their predecessors, making allowances for technological advances, of course. Only they perfectly understand what was in the past and what awaits us in the future. Even studying photographs from the 19th century, it's impossible not to notice some discrepancies between what is seen and the firmly entrenched image of a Russian person. For example, the appearance of women does not raise many questions, but men's costumes can sometimes be baffling, especially those who wore clothing corresponding to their status as a sample. Clerics, it turns out, look completely different than they do now, although modern clerics claim that their attire has not changed since the baptism of Rus. Soldiers also look nothing like in movies and cartoons, and inscriptions in Arabic script on weapons and armor leave one completely stunned. The same applies to money, on which Arabic script is next to Russian. It turns out that some written sources are composed in both languages. For example, a well-known literary monument composed by the Tver merchant Athanasius Nikitin, born in Zhytomyr, is filled with entire paragraphs in Arabic, though written in Russian letters. So what was this? Isolated cases of borrowing? Or perhaps this is evidence of authentic Russian culture? Let's turn to the facts. Initially, European travelers who visited Tartary did not express surprise at the difference in the appearance of the inhabitants of this country from what they were used to at home. This can mean only one thing. The clothing of Europeans, their features, and other national traits did not differ from what they encountered in the East. Moreover, depictions of European cities were absolutely no different from the cities of Tartary. Samarkand, Yaroslav, and Paris looked absolutely identical. Even Chinese cities looked no different from Spanish or English ones. The architecture was unified everywhere. The same towers, the same walls with loopholes, houses, and bridges. Then something happened, after which Europe rapidly turned Gothic and dressed in new clothes. The same process began successfully in Russia, when Peter I and then Catherine II began to carry out the total Europeanization of Russia. There was a mass destruction of written sources and Russian folk musical instruments. There was a ban on skomaraks, who were a unique phenomenon, having no analogues anywhere in the world. Skomarak performances were a blend of puppet theatre, ballet, circus, operetta, and drama theatre all at once. Why do this? Probably to plant a new culture in opposition to the Arabic one, and Russia was initially considered as part of Europe. Then, something went wrong, and the execution of Plan B began. When all of Europe turned into a Gothic world, Russia was assigned the role of a Slavic kingdom, and China became the Celestial Empire. Apparently, it was in the second half of the 19th century that the full national differentiation in architecture, costumes, and other features that form a particular nation was established. So what was before? The answer to this question can be found on old maps. We see that throughout Europe, cities are marked with different symbols. A cross means that peasants predominated here, and a crescent indicates that most of the city's inhabitants practiced Mohammedanism. What? Arabs lived here? Of course not. Religions were made national also artificially. Catholics were assigned Europe, and Mohammedans Asia and the Middle East. However, evidence shows that Muslims and Christians initially lived together. These, it turns out, are only the outer layers. The further one delves, the more interesting it gets. It turns out that the version of Russian history that we know is a late alteration. The country that now occupies the space from the Black to Bering Sea was initially known as Great Tartary, and its inhabitants had Arabic script and numbers on their artifacts. Their architecture, clothing, and other everyday items were no different from European. So what? Tartary was the same as Europe? Absolutely, as we understand the concept of Europe now. But Europe only consisted of the western half of the Roman Empire. In other words, Europe was once just another province in the Empire of Great Tartary. But that, as you understand, is already a completely different story. The Civil War, historians called a schism. Nestorians turned into pomus and old believers, and the fire worshippers were completely exterminated and re-educated, and their temples were adorned with new toppers and new crosses. Now tell me, what are the domes of Orthodox churches called? Onion domes. And what else? Poppy heads. And why poppy heads? What is the connection between a dome resembling an onion and a poppy flower? It's direct. The language of the people is a matrix that reveals all secrets. No matter how much the rulers of the world or the progressors, as I call them, tried to destroy all reminders of the true past, the Russian language preserved everything. One only needs to understand the true meaning of familiar words. In the album of Adam Olearius, many images of Russian temples have been preserved, the domes of which exactly replicate the outlines of a developing poppy capsule. Most likely, this was the symbolism of the Nestorian Church, which dominated the entire territory of Great Tartary, from the Carpathians to the Bering Strait. Zoroastrian temples, most likely, were not much different from Nestorian ones. There were also no cardinal differences between the architecture of mosques and Christian temples. To convert a Mohammedan temple into an Orthodox one, it was enough to replace the egg-shaped dome with an onion dome, and equip the minaret with a bell tower. That's it. Those were all the differences between mosques and churches. Misunderstanding the meaning of words that form the modern Russian language leads to amazing curiosities. A rich ancient Russian dwelling is called a kholm by pseudo-ancient Russian pagans. Kholm. If they only understood the true meaning of this word, they would faint. Kholms are not at all buildings for comfortable living, they are not the analogue of the English concept of a cottage or an Italian villa. Kholms are temples, and a temple is a structure in which the dead were sung. The words pahorony, funeral, and khram, temple, have a similar set of consonants, and this is not a coincidence. The fact is that religious buildings are divided by type according to their purpose and have corresponding architectural features. A temple is where they bury the dead, a cathedral is where gatherings take place, and a church is where sacrifices are made. The word church literally means sea blood, where the article sea, lost in modern Russian, transformed into the English, the, and was preserved in the Belarusian and Ukrainian dialects of the Russian language. And a chapel has no direct relation to religious buildings. Chaz is a period of time. And the word monastery also has its own meaning. Mono means alone, and styr does not mean do not steal, as many think. In this word, the consonants form a skeleton that is akin to the word structure. It turns out that a monastery is a monostructure, or in accordance with the modern rules of the Russian language, self-build, which corresponds to the existing order of things. Monks built their abode themselves, separately, far from settlements, so, monostructure. The same is true for the word terem. A richly decorated house in Russia was called a palace, definitely not a tower. A terem is a domestic prison. Remember the lyrics from the song, My Joy Lives in a High Tower, and in that high tower, there's no way out for anyone. So, terem is not a mansion and not a cottage. It's not a lavish house, but a modest log tower with a staircase inside, where on the upper floor was a domestic prison, usually holding the daughter of the house owner who reached a marriageable age. In the word terem, the same consonants as in the word taerma, prison, and in meaning, it's the same thing. To prevent unwanted marriages, the bride was kept locked up in a high tower, so that a potential, but undesirable suitor couldn't spoil the girl by accident. That's what the song is about, and all of this is a part of our Russian culture. I emphasize, a culture that is unknown and forgotten. What else have we forgotten? A lot. Not just the music and songs, not just the meaning of most Russian words. We've forgotten the faith, the ancestors, their customs, way of life, mythology, cosmogony. Practically everything that was the foundation of such a concept as the Russian world. We're Orthodox, and we've imposed our holidays on the old pagan holidays. What is Kolyada? It's those processions with this sun in the day of the solstice. And Christmas overlapped with the holiday of the winter solstice. It's the birth of the sun, a holiday, and Kolyada became a Christian announcement of Christ's birth, so the church everywhere and always acted missionarily. It destroyed the shrines, putting Christian churches in their place. So that former pagans, used to going to the shrine, being already baptized, now got used to going to the Christian church, and the old pagan holidays it simply loaded with new meaning and renamed.